Hi, it's nice to see you again. Now, like I promised, this is part 2 of the indigenous rights video series in Brazil. In the last video, I covered the indigenous peoples in the Amazon and their plight in modern Brazil. You can see in the link provided below. In this video, I'll be covering the indigenous peoples in the Cerrado. Now, to start off, I'll begin with a recap. The destruction of the Amazon rainforest has been a very well documented phenomenon over the past 3 decades, with constant footage of deforestation airing on national news. This senseless destruction caused international outcry, especially at first back in the 1980s. In response, Brazil made various efforts to curb the destruction. This included designating large areas of land as Indian reserves for indigenous communities, which is crucial given that the majority of biodiversity and carbon storage is found on indigenous occupied areas. In all, this is a great move towards indigenous autonomy. However, a closer look shows an overlooked yet very important dilemma. The dilemma that exists in Brazil's vast Cerrado ecosystem, which is located south of the Amazon. Now, to give a little more information about Cerrado, it's an ecosystem that's located southeast of the Amazon, and it's a woodland savanna that's almost a quarter the size of the United States. Known as the most biodiverse tropical savanna in the world, it's home to more than a third of Brazil's biodiversity. This includes over 4,000 endemic plant species and over 14 endemic mammal species, placing Cerrado above the Amazon in some categories. Along with this rich flora and fauna, the Cerrado is home to a variety of indigenous tribes which have called it home for thousands of years. The most famous being the Guarani peoples in the state of Mato Grosso do Sul. For the past century, the Guarani have faced extreme cases of genocide and ethnocide. For those of you who may be unaware, ethnocide is the deliberate destruction of an ethnic culture through means such as forced assimilation, as opposed to genocide, which kills people outright. Now, this ethnocide, as well as genocide, was done by the hands of state officials and the settlers supporting them. Numbering 51,000 members strong, the Guarani is Brazil's largest indigenous tribe. Unfortunately, Guarani peoples have also become famous for having the highest rate of youth suicide in Brazil, with 684 suicides recorded between 2000 and 2013. Additionally, Mato Grosso do Sul has the record for having the highest indigenous incarceration rate and child malnutrition in the country. Not only do the Guarani face poverty, they are under constant threat by gunmen who regularly terrorize indigenous communities in the Cerrado. In many of these attacks, the offenders act with impunity and target men, women, and children alike. They are hired by local ranchers and farmers who oppose indigenous demarcations and have close connections with regional authorities and media personnel who have very strong anti-indigenous agendas. For the Guarani, this life has been a reality since settlers invaded their tecoa in large mass beginning in the 1880s. In the Guarani language, tecoa is both the physical and spiritual center of Guarani life. It defines how a Guarani person shall live his or her life in a way that's ideal as seen by their shamans. Tecoa can also mean one's attachment to the land in which he or she was born. In essence, it represents the Guarani lifestyle and marks the center of their ethnic identity. For many, this ideal Tecoa lifestyle was severely disrupted when settlers in the colonial state came in the 19th century. During this time, railroads, roads, and telegraphs were built through Guarani and other tribal territories in the southwest portion of Cerrado as an attempt to rapidly modernize the country. This continued well into the 20th century, and by the 1970s, most of Guarani land has been deforested of its natural forest and savanna, which was central to the Guarani's Tecoa. The loss of savanna in Guarani territory, it was essentially an omen for the loss of Cerrado, or the Cerrado ecosystem as a whole. While the southwest section where the Guarani lived was rapidly destroyed early on, luckily the rest of the ecosystem, it was left alone due to its poor soil. With this, many tribes, such as the Zabante, Karaja, Tapua, and Zakiraba, were allowed to continue their way of life. This was the case for them until the mid-1970s, when a rapidly growing population required more agriculture and as a result, more than 50% of Cerrado has been deforested and replaced by cattle ranches and soybean as well as eucalyptus plantations. Deforestation continues unabated as an area larger than London is lost every 2 months. Worst of all, efforts to protect the Amazon may have led to an unintended spillover effect into Cerrado, causing many actors who were previously cutting down the Amazon to move their activities to the endangered savannah. Moreover, the laws protecting the Cerrado are more lenient, as only 2% of the Cerrado is under official protection. Furthermore, while the 2012 Forest Code mandates that landowners preserve up to 80% of the Amazon, in the Cerrado, only 20% is required to be protected, which, compared to the Amazon, is significantly less in comparison. To mark it all off, very little of the Cerrado is protected as an indigenous reserve, as over 98% of indigenous reserves were demarcated in the Amazon. This leaves very little for Brazil's Indian people who live outside the world's largest rainforest. For the Guarani, efforts to get their lands back has been ongoing since the 1970s, and it's been a hard-won fight for them, especially after their tribal leaders and shamans created the Aigatsu, or the Great Assembly in their language, and which was used as a coalition to regain their land. Since then, some land has been regained, but this is now under threat with the Temer administration. With constant anti-indigenous legislations being pushed, the future of Guarani and their rights is uncertain. Already, violence against the Guarani is on the rise again. In 2017 alone, 25 Guarani have been killed in Mato Grosso do Sul. It's gotten to a point where many shamans are now praying for the destruction of the Brazilian state as a final act of rebellion against the loss of their land and the conditions forced upon them. The shamans, they're doing this even knowing full well that their people will be affected. As quoted by anthropologist Delfino Brovaio, "Well, we do not have our land back. Nandoru, which is the Guarani word for shamans, are praying to harm the whites. They're going to pray for a crisis to come in the stock market to affect the money. Another says he will modify the rain to bring many storms or droughts. Another is praying for a disease to attack soy plantations, something that nobody's ever seen like before, a new disease. The Indians who are asking for their lands back are praying for that indeed, for the rain, the storm, the flood to come, and to cause them economic damage. But we know that it will hit us too, because we ask for it. But we are around here as well." The shaman's prayers may already have some basis in reality, as recent research has shown that deforestation in Cerrado has critically affected the region's water cycle. Agricultural lands recycle 60% less water than native vegetation during the dry season. If the destruction continues, there will be less precipitation in general. This won't just affect the Cerrado, but will also delay rainfall in the Amazon. Already, the Amazon is experiencing more forest fires per year. Subsequently, crops and plantation yields are also being negatively affected as the water table decreases. All this land grabbing is affecting not just the indigenous peoples, but the entire Cerrado population. As shown over the past 3 decades, over 40 major municipal conflicts were recorded due to the drying of over 17 important streams. We can only expect conflicts like this to get worse should the world continue to overlook the Cerrado, a crucially important ecosystem, and its indigenous inhabitants who have guarded the region for millennia. Now, despite the rather bleak situation I described, hope is not all lost, as just last year, in fact, a manifesto was proposed by many large fast food and retail companies such as McDonald's and Walmart, both of which source much of their beef and soy products from the Cerrado region. However, while that's all good, agriculture commodity companies such as Cargill, who actively grows soy in the region, has yet to sign the manifesto. On top of that, China buys up to a third of the soy products in Cerrado, and they have yet to sign the agreement either. As long as China does not support the manifesto, then it will continue to be an agreement with no weight to it. Anyways, that's the end of this video. The final part of this series will be covered next week, and it'll cover the overall situation of the indigenous peoples in Brazil and what their future may hold under the rule of the Bancadoristas. Now, like the Amazon, there are organizations that are actively campaigning for the rights of Cerrado's indigenous inhabitants and for their ultimate protection. Here are two below which are prominent in their rights. Survival International. Same as before, they are the world's largest tribal people's rights organization. They have campaigned for the Guarani for several decades and is the tribe's biggest international representative. Currently, Survival is running a petition to President Temer to tackle the high murder rates of Guarani people by gunmen. And I feel like their campaign has the most weight to it when it comes to international NGOs. But to give a more national one, a more localized one, it's the Indigenous Missionary Council. It's a Brazilian NGO that has actively lobbied for the rights of Brazilian Indians across the country since 1972. They have been the forefront in protecting Guarani and Zambante against gunmen and encroachers in recent court cases. Much of the website that they own is in Portuguese, but they accept donations from supporters of all nationalities. Anyways, this will be the end of this series, and I'll see you next week.